United States, Massachusetts, autumn of 1823. The cutting October wind swept golden leaves across the perfectly manicured gardens of Thornfield Female College, an imposing grey stone construction that rose like a fortress in the middle of the oak forest. Its tall, narrow windows seemed like vigilant eyes, watching every movement of the young women who walked through the corridors in mandatory silence. Founded in 1801 by the widow Madame Cordelia Thornfield, the boarding school had become the preferred refuge for the wealthiest families of New England to correct problematic daughters. Far from society's gaze, the young women were molded according to the rigid Puritan standards of the era. The twins, Valerie and Lucy Hawthorne, 19 years old, arrived at the college in a mud-splattered carriage on a rainy September afternoon. Their long black hair contrasted with the pallor of their faces, and their penetrating green eyes carried a disturbing intensity that made other students look away. Daughters of a Boston merchant who had grown rich through maritime trade, the twins were known for their extraordinary capacity for observation. Since childhood, they could detect lies, perceive details others ignored, and make connections that seemed impossible. This curse made them inconvenient in society. They saw too much, questioned too much, knew too much. Madame Thornfield, a 55-year-old woman with graying hair, always pulled back in a severe bun, received the most influential families with calculated smiles and promises of transformation. Respected by the community as an exemplary educator, she had built her reputation over decades of successes in taming rebellious youth. The college functioned as a closed system, 120 internal students, 15 teachers, all women, and only 3 male employees: the elderly gardener, the coachman, and the doctor who visited weekly. The rules were inflexible: silence after 8 p.m., censored correspondence, family visits only on religious holidays. The twins were separated into different dormitories, a strategy by Madame Thornfield to break dangerous bonds. Valerie was placed in the North Dormitory, with a view of the gardens, while Lucy was allocated to the South Dormitory, which faced the dense forest surrounding the property. In the first days, they observed the meticulous routine: 5:30 a.m., wake up, 6 a.m., prayers, 6:30 a.m., breakfast in silence, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., classes and activities, 5:30 p.m., dinner, 6:30 p.m., supervised studies, 8 p.m., mandatory retirement. But something in the shadows of the corridors wasn't right. The twins noticed furtive glances between teachers, whispers abruptly interrupted when they approached, and a palpable tension that hung over the apparently serene environment. The college's isolation was almost absolute. The nearest town was 15 kilometers away by dirt road, and during Massachusetts's harsh winter, snow made any escape impossible. It was the perfect setting for secrets that couldn't leak to the outside world. Valerie and Lucy knew they had been sent for much more than simple behavior correction. They were trapped in a place where truth was more dangerous than any lie. 3 weeks after the twins' arrival, the first anomaly occurred on a cold November morning. During morning prayers in the college chapel, Madame Thornfield announced with her solemn and authoritative voice a new educational measure that would be implemented immediately. "My dear students," she said, her eyes scanning the rows of young women kneeling on the dark wooden benches, "starting today, we will implement the spiritual purification program. Some of you have shown concerning signs of moral deviations that require immediate intervention. The program," she explained, consisted of individual intensive counseling sessions that would take place in the basement of the West Wing, an area of the college that had always remained locked and inaccessible to students. The sessions would be conducted by Madame Thornfield herself and by Miss Evangeline Crowley, the newly arrived moral conduct teacher. Miss Crowley was a woman of approximately 40 years, thin as a dry branch, with small dark eyes that seemed to constantly evaluate the moral worth of each person around her. She had arrived at Thornfield just 2 weeks before the twins, bringing with her a reputation as a specialist in correcting deviant behaviors from other boarding schools in the region. Valerie immediately perceived the first inconsistency. During the announcement, she observed that 3 specific students, Margaret Whitmore, 17 years old, daughter of a Salem judge; Catherine Mills, 18 years old, daughter of a Methodist pastor; and Eleanor Blackwood, 16 years old, distant niece of the founder herself, showed evident signs of terror when their names were mentioned for the first sessions. Margaret began to tremble visibly. Catherine paled to the point of nearly fainting, and Eleanor let out a muffled moan that was quickly silenced by a severe look from Miss Crowley. Lucy, on the other side of the chapel, noticed something even more disturbing. The other teachers seemed completely oblivious to what was happening. Miss Henderson, the literature teacher, continued leafing through her hymnal as if nothing had been announced. Miss Porter, responsible for French classes, kept her gaze fixed on the crucifix above the altar, but Lucy noticed that her hands trembled slightly. After prayers, the twins managed to meet briefly in the corridor connecting the chapel to the refectory. In a few seconds of eye contact and almost imperceptible gestures, a secret language they had developed in childhood, they shared their observations. The anomaly was clear. A legitimate educational program would not cause terror in exemplary students, and experienced teachers would not show signs of nervousness when witnessing normal pedagogical procedures. During lunch, served in absolute silence according to the rules, Valerie observed that Margaret Whitmore didn't touch her food. The young woman, normally known for her impeccable posture and healthy appetite, remained with her eyes fixed on her plate, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white. Lucy, seated 3 tables ahead, noticed that Miss Crowley circulated through the refectory differently from the other teachers. While the others supervised meals, maintaining a respectful distance, Miss Crowley approached the selected students, placed her hand on their shoulders, and whispered something in their ears. With each whisper, the young women recoiled as if they had been touched by red-hot iron. That night, Valerie couldn't sleep. Something in the college's atmosphere had changed drastically after the morning's announcement. The mandatory silence after 8 p.m. seemed more oppressive, more charged with tension. She carefully got up from her bed and approached the window overlooking the inner courtyard. What she saw made her instinctively retreat into the shadows. Miss Crowley was walking through the courtyard at 11:30 p.m., carrying a lantern and a small leather suitcase. She was heading toward the west wing, but not through the main entrance. Instead, she used a side door that Valerie had never noticed before, an almost invisible entrance, hidden behind ivy that grew up the stone wall. Valerie watched for more than an hour. Miss Crowley entered the west wing at 11:35 p.m. and only emerged at 1:15 a.m. When she came out, her expression was different. There was a sinister satisfaction on her face that made Valerie's blood freeze. But the most disturbing thing was what happened when Miss Crowley passed under the dormitory window. She stopped, looked directly up, and smiled. It was as if she knew she was being watched. It was as if she wanted to be seen. The first spiritual purification session was scheduled for the following afternoon at 3 p.m. with Margaret Whitmore. During breakfast, Margaret looked like a ghost. Her skin was so pale it seemed translucent, and her hands trembled so much she could barely hold her teacup. When Miss Crowley approached her table and whispered, "It's time for your renewal, dear," Margaret let out a sob that was quickly muffled by her own hand. At 2:45 p.m., Valerie was in the library when she saw Margaret being escorted by Miss Crowley toward the west wing. The young woman walked as if she were going to her own execution, her steps hesitant and her face completely drained of color. Lucy, who had managed to position herself strategically near a second-floor window overlooking the inner courtyard, observed something that made her blood freeze. Margaret never returned by the same path. At 5 p.m., when she should have been in the refectory for dinner, she simply didn't appear. At 6 p.m., during the evening roll call, Madame Thornfield was questioned about Margaret's absence by Sarah Pemberton, a brave 17-year-old who was a close friend of the missing girl. "Where is Margaret?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling but determined. "She should be here for dinner," Madame Thornfield responded with her calmly authoritative voice. "Miss Whitmore is going through a period of intensive reflection. She will join you when she is adequately renewed." "But when?" Sarah insisted, ignoring the warning looks from the other teachers. "When I decide she is ready," Madame Thornfield replied, and there was something in her tone that made all the students in the room instinctively recoil. That night, Sarah Pemberton couldn't accept the vague explanations about her friend. At 2 a.m., she left her dormitory and began a desperate search for Margaret through the college corridors. Valerie found her wandering the halls like a lost soul, whispering Margaret's name and checking every door, every dark corner, every possible hiding place. "She's nowhere," Sarah whispered to Valerie, tears streaming down her face. "I looked everywhere that's allowed. It's like she just disappeared." It was then that Valerie made a decision that would change everything. She told Sarah about what she had seen the previous night. Miss Crowley walking to the West Wing with her mysterious suitcase. "We have to find out what's happening there," Valerie whispered. "Margaret might be in danger." But before they could make any plan, they heard footsteps echoing through the corridor. Miss Crowley was approaching, carrying her lantern and walking directly toward them. The two young women hid behind a marble column, their hearts beating so loudly they feared the sound might give them away. Miss Crowley passed so close they could smell the strange odor emanating from her clothes, a chemical, medicinal smell that made their stomachs turn. When Miss Crowley finally passed, Sarah was trembling uncontrollably. "She knew," Sarah whispered. "She knew we were here. She was hunting us." In the following days, Catherine Mills and Eleanor Blackwood went through the same process. Catherine was taken for her session on a rainy Thursday, and Eleanor on a Friday that dawned covered with frost. But this time, the twins were prepared to observe. Lucy managed to position herself at a strategic point on the second floor, from where she could see both the main entrance to the West Wing and the secret side entrance that Valerie had discovered. Valerie was responsible for observing the teachers' movements and any changes in the college routine. When Catherine Mills was taken for her session, Lucy observed something terrifying. The young woman entered through the main door, but never came out through it. Instead, approximately 3 hours later, Lucy saw two figures leaving through the secret side entrance, Miss Crowley and a second person carrying something heavy wrapped in sheets. The second figure was Madame Thornfield, and what they were carrying had exactly the size and shape of a human body. When it was Eleanor Blackwood's turn, the situation became even more sinister. Eleanor was Madame Thornfield's distant niece, and her family had trusted the aunt to take care of her moral education. On the morning of her session, Eleanor tried to escape. At 6 a.m. during prayers, she simply didn't appear. A search was organized, and she was found 2 hours later hiding in the library attic, shivering from cold and terror. "I won't go," she screamed when Miss Crowley tried to take her. "I know what you did to Margaret and Catherine. I know." Miss Crowley smiled, a cold and calculating smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dear Eleanor," she said with a voice sweet as poisoned honey, "you are clearly suffering from hysterical delusions. This only confirms that you urgently need our intervention." Eleanor was dragged, screaming and struggling, to the West Wing. Her screams echoed through the corridors for almost 10 minutes before being abruptly silenced. None of the three young women were ever seen again. Madame Thornfield's explanations always followed the same pattern. Period of intensive reflection, spiritual renewal, purification process requiring temporary isolation. But the twins noticed something no one else had: the letters to families. Valerie discovered that letters were being sent to the parents of the missing young women, supposedly written by the students themselves, explaining that they had decided to dedicate themselves completely to religious life and no longer desired contact with the outside world. The letters were convincing, written on official college paper and apparently signed by the young women. But Valerie, who had observed Margaret's handwriting during classes, noticed subtle inconsistencies in the writing. The letters were forgeries. With the disappearance of 3 students in less than 2 weeks, a climate of absolute terror settled over Thornfield College. The young women whispered among themselves during the few moments when they weren't being supervised, speculating about the fate of their missing classmates. Sarah Pemberton had become a shadow of herself. She barely ate, barely slept, and spent most of her time staring fixedly at the West Wing, as if expecting to see Margaret emerge from its shadowy depths. Other students began showing signs of nervous breakdown. Mary Ashford developed a nervous tic that made her constantly look over her shoulder. Rebecca Thornton began having nightmares so intense that her screams woke the entire dormitory during the night. And Miss Crowley watched everything with evident satisfaction. During meals, she circulated among the tables like a predator, choosing its next prey. Her small dark eyes fixed on each student, evaluating, calculating, deciding who would be next to need purification. The twins knew they were next on the list. They had asked too many questions, observed too much, connected dots that should have remained separate. Valerie and Lucy Hawthorne represented a threat that Madame Thornfield and Miss Crowley couldn't ignore much longer. With the arrival of Massachusetts's harsh winter, Thornfield College transformed into a prison of ice and stone. Snow completely blocked the roads, and frost-covered windows created an even more claustrophobic atmosphere. It was the perfect setting for secrets to remain buried until spring. Valerie and Lucy, had developed a meticulous information gathering system. Using their natural capacity for observation and the advantage of being twins, which allowed them to be in two different places simultaneously, they began mapping the patterns behind the disappearances. The twins created a surveillance schedule that covered 24 hours a day. Valerie took the day shift, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., observing teachers' movements, surviving students' behavioral patterns, and any unusual activity in the West Wing. Lucy was responsible for the night shift, from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., when the most suspicious activities seemed to occur. They developed a code based on positions of personal objects to communicate their discoveries. A book placed in a certain way on the library table meant suspicious activity observed. A handkerchief left in a specific position on the windowsill indicated imminent danger. A pen positioned in a certain way during classes transmitted important information discovered. Through weeks of careful observation, the twins identified that victims followed a specific profile. Young women between 16 and 18 years old, never the youngest nor the oldest daughters of influential families. Judges, pastors, prosperous merchants, local politicians, students who showed signs of intellectual rebellion, questioned rules, asked inconvenient questions, or showed interest in subjects considered inappropriate for women. The timing was always the same. Sessions occurred on Thursdays or Fridays, always in the late afternoon, when most teachers were busy with other activities. But there was a fifth pattern that was the most terrifying of all. All victims had shown signs of discovering something about the college's true nature before being selected for purification. Lucy discovered that Miss Crowley maintained a secret office on the third floor of the library, an area supposedly used only for storing old books. During one of her nightly vigils, she saw Miss Crowley climbing the stairs with her lantern and disappearing through a door that Lucy had assumed was permanently locked. The next night, Lucy decided to investigate. Using a technique they had learned in childhood, forcing locks with hairpins, she managed to open the secret office door. What she found made her nauseous. The office was a sanctuary, dedicated to what Miss Crowley called the art of female purification. The walls were covered with anatomical diagrams of the human brain, illustrations of surgical procedures, and photographs of young women in various stages of alteration. Miss Crowley kept a black leather notebook where she recorded detailed observations about the students' behavior. Lucy managed to read several pages before hearing approaching footsteps. Margaret W. Exceptional psychological resistance. First attempt at frontal lobotomy resulted in excessive hemorrhaging. Second attempt with modified technique. The page was stained with something that looked like blood. Catherine M. Ideal subject for trepanation experiment. Skull of adequate thickness. Procedure performed successfully, but final result unsatisfactory. Disposal necessary. Eleanor B. Surprising physical resistance. Requires stronger sedation. Note: check laudanum dosage before next procedure. Lucy mentally photographed every detail before escaping from the office. But when she reached the corridor, Miss Crowley was waiting for her. "Good evening, Miss Hawthorne," said Miss Crowley with her icy voice. "Doing a little nighttime reading?" Lucy felt her blood freeze, but forced herself to maintain composure. "I was looking for a prayer book, Miss Crowley. I've been having nightmares and thought spiritual reading might help." Miss Crowley studied her for a long moment, her small dark eyes seeming to penetrate directly into her soul. "Nightmares can be a sign of mental imbalance, dear. Perhaps you need a special counseling session soon." The threat was clear. While Lucy investigated the secret office, Valerie made her own terrifying discovery. During one of her daytime observations, she noticed that the elderly gardener, Mr. Tobias Grimm, had access to the West Wing and frequently carried large, heavy sacks to the forest surrounding the college. Valerie decided to follow him during one of his walks to the forest. What she discovered made her vomit violently behind a tree. Mr. Grimm was burying bodies. In a hidden clearing, approximately 500 meters into the forest, there were at least 12 shallow graves. Some were recent. The earth was still dark and moist. Others were older, marked only by small stones that looked like improvised tombstones. Valerie realized that the disappearances at Thornfield College hadn't begun with Margaret, Catherine, and Eleanor. They had been happening for years, perhaps since the institution's founding. When Mr. Grimm finished burying what was clearly a human body wrapped in blood-stained sheets, he turned and looked directly at where Valerie was hiding. "I know you're there, girl," he said with a hoarse and tired voice. "Come here. We need to talk." Valerie considered fleeing, but something in the old man's voice made her hesitate. She emerged from her hiding place, prepared to run if necessary. "You shouldn't be here," Mr. Grimm said, but his voice carried no threat. Instead, there was a deep sadness and exhaustion that seemed to come from years of horror. What are you doing?" Valerie whispered. "What they forced me to do," he replied, looking at the freshly dug grave. "I've worked here for 22 years. For 22 years I've been burying her victims." "Her? Madame Thornfield? And now this new witch, Miss Crowley? They told me that if I don't do what they command, my granddaughter would be next." He looked at Valerie with eyes full of tears. "My granddaughter studies here, Rebecca Thornton." Valerie remembered Rebecca, the young woman who had developed terrible nightmares after the recent disappearances. "How many?" she asked, though she feared the answer. 43, Mr. Grimm replied without hesitation. 43 young women buried in this forest over the years. And you'll be the 44th if you're not careful. Mr. Grimm revealed to Valerie that he had been secretly documenting the crimes for years, waiting for an opportunity to expose the truth without putting his granddaughter in danger. "I have a list," he said, taking a yellowed paper from his pocket. "Names, dates, methods of disposal, everything hidden in my cabin. If something happens to me, at least there will be evidence." He looked at Valerie with desperate intensity. "You and your sister are different. You see things. You might be our only chance to stop this." Valerie realized she had found an unexpected ally, someone who knew all the dark secrets of Thornfield College and was willing to help them. "What do you know about the basement of the West Wing?" she asked. Mr. Grimm's face contorted with disgust. "It's where she does experiments. Madame Thornfield believes she can cure what she calls female rebellion through brain surgery. Miss Crowley is her technical assistant." "Brain surgery?" "Lobotomies, trepanations, things that would make a butcher vomit." He pointed to the freshly dug grave. "This was Eleanor Blackwood. She survived for 3 days after the procedure. 3 days of agony before finally dying." Mr. Grimm revealed the most shocking aspect of the entire conspiracy. Many of the families knew exactly what was happening. "They pay extra," he said bitterly. "Parents who want their daughters permanently corrected pay an additional fee. They know their daughters will never return home, and that's exactly what they want." Valerie felt her world collapse. "Our parents, do they know?" "I don't know about yours specifically," Mr. Grimm replied, "but I know that at least half the families who send girls here are paying for the complete service." With Mr. Grimm's information and Lucy's discoveries in the secret office, the twins elaborated a desperate plan. They needed to access the basement of the West Wing to document the horrors happening there, collect physical evidence of the experiments, find a way to communicate their discoveries to authorities outside the college, survive long enough for the truth to be revealed. Mr. Grimm agreed to help them, providing detailed maps of the underground tunnels that connected different parts of the college, tunnels that Madame Thornfield used to move bodies without being seen. But they had a problem. Miss Crowley had become suspicious of the twins' activities. During meals, she watched them constantly. During classes, she asked apparently innocent questions that were clearly attempts to discover what they knew. And then, on a cold December morning, the worst happened. During breakfast, Madame Thornfield made an announcement that made the twins' blood freeze. "Tomorrow we will have 2 special spiritual purification sessions. Miss Valerie Hawthorne and Miss Lucy Hawthorne have shown concerning signs of dangerous complicity. Their sessions are scheduled for 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. respectively." The twins had less than 24 hours to discover what was happening in the basement of the West Wing before becoming the next victims. That night, while the wind howled through the icy windows and snow continued to fall, further isolating Thornfield College from the outside world, Valerie and Lucy knew that the next phase of their investigation would also be their last chance for survival. Friday, December 13th, 1823, the night of Truth Dawn arrived with sepulchral silence that seemed to foretell tragedy. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold was so intense that Thornfield College's windows were completely covered with a thick layer of ice. It was as if winter itself conspired to keep the institution's secrets buried forever. Valerie and Lucy knew this would be their only opportunity. At 3 p.m. that day, one of them would be taken to the basement. At 4 p.m., The other would follow the same path. If they didn't discover the truth before then, they would join the list of young women who simply disappeared for a period of intensive reflection. At 1 a.m., Mr. Grimm appeared at Valerie's dormitory window, as planned. He had brought master keys that gave access to all areas of the college, keys he had secretly copied over his 22 years of service. "This is your only chance," he whispered through the slightly open window. "Miss Crowley is in the basement preparing equipment for tomorrow. Madame Thornfield is in her office working on correspondence to your families." The false farewell letters were already being prepared. Valerie climbed down through the window using an improvised rope made of sheets, while Lucy remained in the dormitory to create an alibi in case someone checked her presence. The plan was simple. Valerie would document everything in the basement while Lucy kept watch and was ready to create a distraction if necessary. Mr. Grimm guided Valerie through the underground tunnels that connected the main basement to the west wing. The tunnels were narrow, damp, and smelled of mold and something much worse, a sweet and nauseating odor that Valerie recognized as the smell of death. "These tunnels were built during the War of Independence," Mr. Grimm explained as they walked. "They were used to hide supplies from the British. Now she uses them for other purposes." When they reached the basement of the West Wing, Mr. Grimm stopped and held Valerie's arm. "What you're going to see in there will change you forever," he said, his old eyes full of sadness. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Valerie thought of Margaret, Catherine, Eleanor, and the 40 other young women buried in the forest. "I have to do this." What Valerie saw when Mr. Grimm opened the basement door made her heart almost stop beating. The basement wasn't a spiritual counseling room. It was a human experimentation laboratory that would make the worst nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. The main room was divided into several sections, each more terrifying than the last. 3 improvised surgical tables with blood-stained leather straps to immobilize patients. Medical instruments that seemed more suitable for a butcher shop than any therapeutic procedure were arranged on metal trays. Bone saws, manual drills for trepanation, scalpels of various sizes, and devices that Valerie couldn't even imagine what they were for. Flasks containing unidentified chemical substances were organized on shelves, some of which emanated vapors that made Valerie's eyes water instantly. Handwritten labels identified contents such as mercury solution, brain concentration, modified laudanum, permanent sedation, and carbolic acid, post-procedure sterilization. Shelves filled with detailed diaries documenting each session performed over the years. Valerie picked up one of the most recent volumes and read with growing horror, Experiment 41, Margaret Whitmore. Date, November 15th, 1823. Procedure: application of mercury solution directly to cerebral cortex through double trepanation. Objective: eliminate independent thinking tendencies while maintaining basic motor functions. Result: patient maintained consciousness for 2 hours and 37 minutes after application, showed signs of extreme terror but inability to articulate complex thoughts. Death by cerebral hemorrhage after prolonged convulsions. Notes: excessive dosage. Reduce concentration to 15% in next test. Consider additional sedation to reduce unnecessary suffering. Experiment number 42, Catherine Mills. Date, November 21st, 1823. Procedure: experimental frontal lobotomy using modified Crowley technique. Objective: create permanent docility state preserving domestic work capabilities. Result: procedure technically successful. Patient survived 4 days in vegetative state before succumbing to brain infection. During survival period, demonstrated total obedience but inability to perform complex tasks. Notes: environment not sufficiently sterile. Implement more rigorous cleaning protocol. Consider experimental antibiotics. Experiment 43, Eleanor Blackwood. Date, November 28, 1823. Procedure: combination of hallucinogenic drugs with sensory deprivation followed by partial lobotomy. Objective: break psychological resistance before main surgical procedure. Result: patient demonstrated exceptional resistance. Required 72 hours of psychological preparation before main procedure could be performed. Death by cardiac arrest, induced by extreme terror during final phase. Notes: some individuals possess superior mental resistance. Develop specific protocol for high resistance cases. A smaller room, naturally refrigerated by winter's cold, where the victims' bodies were stored before final disposal. Valerie counted 9 bodies in different stages of decomposition, all young women, all wearing Thornfield College uniforms. Some bodies showed evident signs of the experiments: skulls with drilled holes, partially removed brains, and surgical wounds that had been roughly sewn up. But the most terrifying thing was that one of the bodies was still warm. A fourth room that Valerie almost didn't have the courage to enter contained preserved specimens, parts of human brains floating in glass jars, each labeled with the victim's name and details about the experiment performed. Margaret W., frontal cortex, mercury resistance. Catherine M., temporal lobe, partial lobotomy effects. Eleanor B., hippocampus, response to prolonged terror. On the laboratory's main table, Valerie found a document that revealed the complete extent of the conspiracy. It was a 47-page manifesto written by Madame Thornfield herself, titled The Purification of the Female Mind, a scientific study on the permanent elimination of rebellious tendencies in the young female population. The document revealed that Madame Thornfield and Miss Crowley were partners in a series of pseudoscientific experiments based on the belief that rebellious tendencies in young women were a form of hereditary mental illness that could be cured through precise surgical interventions in the brain. But the manifesto went far beyond simple individual madness. The document detailed how they had developed their techniques in 6 previous institutions over 15 years. Asylum Hills, Vermont, 1808-1812. 23 victims. Convent of St. Agatha, Connecticut, 1813-1815. 18 victims. Mercy Orphanage, New Hampshire, 1816-1818. 31 victims. Whitmore Female Academy, Maine, 1819-1820. 15 victims. Blackwood Boarding College, Rhode Island, 1821-1822. 27 victims. Thornfield College, Massachusetts, 1823 to present. 43 victims. Total documented 157 young women murdered in the name of science. But the most shocking revelation was in the manifesto's last pages. Madame Thornfield wasn't conducting these experiments out of sadism or simple madness. She was being financed and directed by a secret organization called the Society for the Preservation of Natural Order. This society was composed of extremely influential men, state Supreme Court judges, senators, religious leaders of various denominations, industrial magnates, and even 2 state governors who saw young women's rebellious tendencies as an existential threat to the established social order. The ultimate goal was to develop a procedure that could be applied en masse to create a generation of women completely submissive and incapable of independent thought. Thornfield College was just one of 12 testing laboratories spread throughout New England. The list of financiers and society members included names that Valerie recognized, not just parents of some victims, but men who had sent their own daughters to be cured of their independence of spirit, knowing exactly what the final result would be. Among the names was Margaret Whitmore's own father, Judge Cornelius Whitmore, who had paid an additional fee of $500 to ensure his daughter received the complete treatment and would never again embarrass him with her opinions about women's rights. While Valerie absorbed the horrors documented in the manifesto, she heard footsteps descending the stone stairs leading to the basement. Miss Crowley had returned unexpectedly. Mr. Grimm signaled for Valerie to hide behind one of the specimen shelves, but it was too late. Miss Crowley entered the laboratory carrying a lantern and a suitcase of surgical instruments. "Well, well," said Miss Crowley's cold and calculating voice, echoing off the stone walls. "It seems our next patient decided to anticipate her session." Miss Crowley didn't seem surprised. In fact, she seemed satisfied. "I was expecting this," she continued, placing her suitcase on one of the surgical tables and beginning to organize her instruments with the precision of an experienced craftsman. "You two were very predictable, very observant." Valerie remained hidden, her heart beating so loudly she feared the sound might give her away. Through a gap between the specimen jars, she saw Miss Crowley prepare a syringe with a yellowish liquid. "Don't worry, dear," Miss Crowley continued, speaking as if she knew exactly where Valerie was hidden. "Your suffering will be educational. We've perfected our technique considerably since the first setbacks." Miss Crowley slowly approached the shelf where Valerie was hiding, her steps echoing sinisterly in the underground laboratory. "You know, Miss Hawthorne, You and your sister represent a fascinating case study. Identical twins with superior observation capabilities. We'll be able to compare how different purification techniques affect genetically identical brains. Miss Crowley stopped in front of one of the surgical tables and began adjusting the leather straps, testing their resistance. Madame Thornfield is very excited about tomorrow's experiments, she said, her voice carrying sickly satisfaction. Or rather today's. We've passed midnight, haven't we? She turned and looked directly at Valerie's hiding place. You two will be our most important case studies. The Society is particularly interested in understanding how superior intelligence can be redirected for more appropriate purposes. Miss Crowley walked to a shelf and picked up a flask labeled Experimental Solution Number 7, Consciousness Preservation During Procedure. We've developed a new technique, she explained, with the enthusiasm of a professor discussing his favorite research. We can keep the patient completely conscious during the entire procedure, allowing her to experience every moment of the transformation. Valerie knew she couldn't remain hidden forever. Miss Crowley clearly knew where she was and was just prolonging the psychological terror. She decided to emerge from her hiding place and face her captor directly. I know about the Society, Valerie said, emerging from the shadows with the manifesto in her hands. I know about the other laboratories. I know about everything. Miss Crowley smiled, a smile that didn't reach her cold and calculating eyes. Of course you do, dear. That was exactly what we expected. She placed the syringe on the table and approached Valerie. Do you think it was coincidence that you two were sent here? Do you think it was chance that your observation capabilities caught our attention? The truth hit Valerie like lightning. You wanted us to discover. We needed test subjects who were intelligent enough to fully comprehend what was happening to them, Miss Crowley explained. Informed terror produces much more interesting neurological reactions than ignorant fear. Heavy footsteps echoed down the stairs, and Madame Thornfield appeared at the laboratory entrance. She no longer carried any trace of her maternal persona. Her eyes shone with fanatic intensity, and her hands were stained with something that looked like fresh blood. Our little spy decided to join us, Madame Thornfield said, her voice carrying sinister satisfaction. Perfect. We can begin preparations immediately. She approached Valerie, who instinctively backed away until her back touched the cold stone wall. You know, Miss Hawthorne, your family paid very well for our services. They are particularly anxious for you to be corrected. That's a lie, Valerie screamed, but there was a terrible doubt growing in her heart. Madame Thornfield laughed, a sound that echoed off the laboratory walls like a demon's laughter. Oh, my dear naive child, why do you think families send their most problematic daughters to such remote institutions? Why do you think they pay such exorbitant fees for our specialized education? She took a paper from her pocket, an official contract with the Hawthorne family seal. Your parents signed a very specific agreement. They paid Hal $200, our premium rate, to ensure you two received the complete treatment. They don't want you back, dear. They want you to disappear. The revelation that her own parents had conspired for her death almost broke Valerie's spirit. But then she remembered all the young women who had died before her, Margaret, Catherine, Eleanor, and the 40 others buried in the forest. She couldn't give up. Not now. You are monsters, Valerie said, her voice trembling but determined. And I will ensure the world knows what you did. Miss Crowley and Madame Thornfield exchanged amused looks. And exactly how do you intend to do that? Miss Crowley asked. You're kilometers from any civilization, in the middle of a snowstorm, in an underground basement that no one else knows about. But Valerie had a trump card they didn't expect. Because my sister isn't alone, she said, forcing a confident smile. And because you completely underestimated our planning capacity. At that moment, Lucy appeared at the laboratory entrance, but she wasn't alone. Dr. Samuel Morrison, the visiting physician, was with her, along with 2 law officers who had arrived at the college during the snowstorm. Dr. Morrison, Madame Thornfield said, trying to regain her composure. What an unexpected surprise. What brings you here at this hour? Dr. Morrison looked around the laboratory with evident horror and disgust. I received a very interesting letter yesterday, he said, his voice loaded with authority. A letter detailing very serious accusations about this institution's activities. He took an envelope from his pocket. A letter that Lucy had managed to send secretly through Mr. Grimm, who had contacts in the nearest town. The letter included very specific information about unauthorized medical experiments being performed on minors. Miss Crowley attempted one last desperate lie. "Dr. Morrison, these are clearly hysterical fantasies of disturbed young women. As a physician, surely you recognize the signs of female delirium." "Silence!" Dr. Morrison roared, his patience finally exhausted. "I served as a military surgeon for 15 years. I recognize a torture laboratory when I see one." He pointed to the blood-stained surgical instruments, the jars of human specimens, and the detailed experiment diaries. "You two are under arrest for mass murder, conspiracy, and crimes against humanity." Madame Thornfield realized her empire of horror was crumbling. In a desperate move, she grabbed a scalpel from the surgical table and advanced toward Valerie. "If I can't have my experiments," she screamed, her eyes shining with complete madness, "at least I can eliminate the witnesses." But Mr. Grimm had been waiting in the shadows. He emerged from behind one of the shelves and struck Madame Thornfield with a gardening spade, knocking her unconscious on the stone floor. Miss Crowley tried to escape through the underground tunnels, but the law officers were prepared. They captured her before she could escape, finding her trying to destroy evidence in an improvised fire. While the officers arrested the criminals, Dr. Morrison made a discovery that revealed the true extent of the conspiracy. In a safe hidden behind a false shelf, he found detailed correspondence with the 12 other society laboratories, complete lists of all organization members, including names, addresses, and financial contributions, expansion plans for the program to other regions of the country government, documents suggesting the conspiracy had ramifications even in Washington, D.C. The horror network was much larger than anyone had imagined. Madame Thornfield was tried and sentenced to death for mass murder. She was executed by hanging in June 1824, but not before revealing the names of all her co-conspirators in a desperate attempt to reduce her sentence. Miss Crowley tried to plead insanity, but evidence of methodical planning and detailed documentation made this defense impossible. She was also executed in August 1824. Mr. Grimm was pardoned of any crime in recognition of his cooperation and the fact that he had been coerced through threats against his granddaughter. He became a key witness in subsequent trials. The discovery of Thornfield College's horrors triggered the largest criminal investigation in New England's history up to that point. The case became known as the Purification Scandal, and its ramifications extended throughout the country. The revelation of the existence of the Society for the Preservation of Natural Order shocked the nation. When members' names were made public, the scandal brought down entire state governments. 12 similar laboratories were closed in coordinated operations by federal authorities. Whitmore Female Academy, Maine. 31 bodies found Convent of St. Agatha, Connecticut. 28 bodies found Blackwood Boarding College, Rhode Island. 35 bodies found Mercy Female Institute, New Hampshire. 22 bodies found, and 8 other institutions spread across Massachusetts, Vermont, and even New York. The total number of documented victims reached 312 young women. 47 influential men were arrested, including 2 state governors, 5 state Supreme Court judges, 12 state senators and representatives, 15 religious leaders of various denominations, 13 industrial magnates and merchants. Valerie and Lucy Hawthorne became involuntary symbols of female resistance and courage in the face of institutionalized oppression. Their families, initially embarrassed by the scandal, eventually became proud of their daughter's courage, especially after it was revealed that the contract supposedly authorizing their death had been forged. Valerie used her traumatic experience as motivation to become one of the first women to study medicine in the United States. She specialized in female mental health and dedicated her career to exposing abusive treatments disguised as medicine. In 1847, she founded the Hawthorne Institute for Female Mental Health, the country's first medical institution run entirely by women. Lucy became an investigative journalist, using her observation skills to expose corruption and abuse of power in respectable institutions. Her articles about the purification scandal were published in newspapers across the country and helped maintain public pressure on authorities to continue investigations. Tobias Grimm became a respected figure in the fight for women's rights. His granddaughter, Rebecca Thornton, survived the college's horrors and became one of Massachusetts' first certified teachers, dedicating her life to creating safe educational environments for young women. Mr. Grimm used his experience to help other families identify signs of abusive institutions. He traveled throughout New England, speaking in churches and community meetings about the dangers of sending daughters to remote boarding schools without adequate supervision. The purification scandal led to significant educational reforms throughout the country. Institution Educational Supervision Act, 1825, required regular government inspections of all boarding schools. Minor Protection in Institutions Act, 1826, established basic rights for boarding students. Educational Transparency Act, 1827, required all educational institutions to maintain public records of their methods and results. The Thornfield College case revealed a terrifying truth about 19th century American society, the ease with which systematic abuse can be disguised as moral virtue when conducted by respectable figures in trusted institutions. The Hawthorne twins proved that careful observation, courage to question authorities, and refusal to accept convenient explanations can be the only defenses against predators who hide behind respectable facades. In 1850, 27 years after the events at Thornfield College, Valerie and Lucy Hawthorne published a joint book titled The Twins Who Saw Too Much, A Warning for America. In the preface they wrote, "We learned that the greatest horrors often happen not in obvious shadows, but in places where we least expect to find them, in institutions that promise protection, care, and education. We learned that respectability can be the most effective mask for evil, and that community trust can be predators' most powerful tool. But we also learned that truth, however terrible it may be, always finds a way to emerge, and that courageous individuals, armed only with careful observation and unwavering determination, can bring down entire empires built on lies and suffering." For you who followed this terrifying journey through Thornfield College's icy corridors, the Hawthorne twins story serves as an eternal reminder. Constant vigilance is the price of safety. Always question when something doesn't seem right. Trust your instincts when you detect inconsistencies, and never underestimate the power of careful observation and courage to act when confronted with injustice. In a world where predators still disguise themselves as protectors, where abusers still hide behind respectable titles, and where institutions can still be corrupted by those who should protect them, the story of Valerie and Lucy Hawthorne remains more relevant than ever. Truth can be terrifying, but ignorance is always more dangerous. The twins who saw too much taught us that seeing the truth, however terrible it may be, is always better than living in comfortable ignorance that allows horrors to continue. Their courage saved not only their own lives, but the lives of hundreds of other young women who would have become victims if the conspiracy hadn't been exposed. And perhaps most importantly, they reminded us that each of us has the responsibility to be observant, to question, to act when something isn't right, because sometimes we are the only thing standing between innocence and absolute evil. And so ends our journey through the hidden horrors of Thornfield College. The story of Valerie and Lucy Hawthorne stands as a testament to the power of observation, courage, and the refusal to accept comfortable lies when uncomfortable truths demand attention. Their legacy extends far beyond the walls of that cursed institution in the Massachusetts wilderness. In the decades that followed the purification scandal, their influence could be seen in the gradual transformation of American society's approach to women's education and rights. The reforms they helped inspire saved countless lives and prevented similar atrocities from taking root in other institutions. But perhaps their greatest victory was not in the criminals they exposed or the laws they helped change, but in the simple yet profound lesson they left for future generations, that evil often wears the mask of respectability, and that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. The twins who saw too much became the women who changed everything, not through grand gestures or political movements, but through the quiet courage of refusing to look away when others chose blindness, and the determination to speak truth when others chose silence. Their story reminds us that heroes are not born from extraordinary circumstances, but from ordinary people who choose to act when action is needed most. In a world that still harbors predators behind facades of authority and respectability, the Hawthorne twins' legacy continues to shine as a beacon of hope and a call to vigilance. The truth they uncovered was indeed terrifying, but their courage in facing it proved that even the darkest secrets cannot survive the light of determined investigation and unwavering moral conviction. In the end, they proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon against institutional evil is simply the willingness to see what others refuse to acknowledge, and the courage to act on what you've seen. Their story lives on as both warning and inspiration, a reminder that the price of safety is vigilance and that the responsibility to protect the innocent belongs to us all.